For generations, Brazil didn't just play football, they defined it. 5 World Cups, street ball skills into World Cup goals, icons whose names didn't need explaining. From Pelé to Zico, Romario, Ronaldinho and Ronaldo, Brazil was the standard, not because of efficiency or structure, but because of expression. Football in Brazil was played with joy. Joga Bonito, the beautiful game. It wasn't just a slogan, it was the way they played. Daring, improvisational, joyous, and most importantly, successful. Between 1994 and 2002, Brazil reached 3 straight World Cup finals, winning 2 of them. That team in 2002, headlined by Cafu, Ronaldo, Rivaldo, and Ronaldinho, weren't just dominant, they were unstoppable. Since then, Brazil has only made 1 semi-final across 5 World Cups, and the magic, which seemed impossible to dim, faded. So what actually happened to Brazilian football? Before the soulless systems, before the spreadsheets of pressing lanes and data-fueled heat maps, there was Joga Bonito. Born not in academies, but in the streets of Rio, Sao Paulo, and Porto Alegre. It danced through alleyways, echoed off favela walls, and hummed in the pulse of Brazil. It was an art form, a rhythm, a religion whose disciples would rise into legend. So let's talk about it. In 1970, Brazil gave the world its greatest footballing symphony. Pelé's third crown, Carlos Alberto's thunderous strike, and a team that redefined beauty in motion. But 4 years later, the world had changed, and Brazil, perhaps unknowingly, walked into a new era, unprepared for what lay ahead without the commander-in-chief for the first time. The 1974 World Cup was hosted in West Germany, and Brazil entered the tournament still wearing the badge of their 1970 greatness with pride. Manager Mario Zagallo stuck with the iconic 4-2-4 formation, but the spirit of Joga Bonito, once guided by Pelé, was now left to Jairzinho, Rivelino, and Paulo César, who would prove unfit to fill his shoes. Placed in Group 2 alongside Yugoslavia, Scotland and Zaire, Brazil struggled to ignite. A tense 0-0 draw with Yugoslavia showed the midfield lacked invention. Only against Zaire did Brazil find the net comfortably, a 3-0 win, but against a team debuting at the World Cup for the first time. Advancing to the second group phase, Brazil met the future of football, the Netherlands, led by Rinus Michels and Johan Cruyff. Total football, as they called it, was fluid, positionless, and relentless. Brazil's man-marking system was pulled apart, their midfield outnumbered, and their press non-existent. With Niskin scoring in the 50th minute and Cruyff in the 65th, a 2-0 defeat signalled more than elimination. It signalled the end of an era of absolute dominance. Brazil exited the tournament bruised, tactically exposed, and creatively stagnant. The flair remained only in name, the movement was mechanical, and the improvisation, which was once stark under Pelé, gone. 1974 wasn't just a loss, it was a warning that artistry alone was no longer enough to take the World Cup home. The world had begun to mechanize, and Brazil had to choose, preserve the art or embrace the system. After the disappointment of 1974, Brazil entered the 1978 World Cup, a team in search of identity. The golden generation had aged. The flowing football of the past had been replaced by something colder, something more calculated. And under coach Claudio Coutinho, a former army captain and fitness specialist, Brazil's football grew more physical and more disciplined. Coutinho introduced zonal marking, something radical in Brazil. The midfield was compact and the attack more direct. Jogo Bonito, for the first time, would be second to the system. Headed by Zico, the elegant but underused Flamengo playmaker, the attacking spark came from the industrious Terceiro and forward Roberto Dinamite. Toninho Cerezo and Batista brought steel to the midfield, while Oscar and Amaral anchored a conservative backline. 3 games, 1 win, 2 draws, just 2 goals scored. Brazil would barely advance, but the flair was missing and the margins were thin. Brazil's performances would sharpen slightly in the second round, with Terceiro emerging as an unlikely talisman with 3 goals and being consistent danger on the left. But it was Argentina, the hosts, who changed everything. Brazil had finished their group undefeated, with a +5 goal difference, and to reach the final, Argentina needed to beat Peru by 4 goals. They would go on to win 6-0. The match, which is still shrouded in mystery and controversy and probably needs its own video, eliminated Brazil and sent the hosts through. Brazil would defeat Italy to secure 3rd place, but it felt hollow. They had not lost a single match, yet were denied a shot at the final. Brazil had chosen control over chaos and structure over soul. They finished undefeated, yet somehow they felt unloved, because they hadn't played like Brazil. By 1982, the fire of Jogo Bonito had been rekindled. Coach Tele Santana refused pragmatism. He believed in beauty, in passing triangles, freedom of expression, and midfield poetry. Luckily for him, this Brazil team was blessed. From Zico, the conductor, to Socrates, the philosopher, and Falcao, the box-to-box maestro, it was a midfield built to control time itself. Nominally a 4-2-2-2, Brazil's system morphed in possession. Fullbacks pushed up, midfielders rotated freely, and the ball rarely stopped moving. They didn't press, they didn't destroy, but instead they invited you to dance and beat you to the rhythm. 3 wins, 10 goals, every strike a painting. Against the Soviet Union, Socrates slalomed past defenders for a thunderous equalizer. Ida volleyed in one of the tournament's greatest goals, and Scotland and New Zealand were dismantled with elegance and ease. But in 1982, there was no round of 16. Brazil would face Argentina and Italy in a brutal second group stage. However, they outclassed the reigning champions Argentina. From Zico to Junior, Junior to Serginho, Argentina chased shadows. Brazil only needed a draw in their final game against Italy. But then, Paolo Rossi happened. Italy sat deep, compact. They man-marked Zico, disrupted transitions, pounced on errors. Twice Brazil equalized, and twice they would chase a winner, never a draw. Because Tele Santana never taught them how to play for a draw. Falcao's goal, a left-footed rocket, briefly restored hope, but off a corner it deflected, and Rossi finished off his hat-trick, and Brazil were out. It wasn't just a loss, it was an assassination of innocence. Brazil had dared to believe that beauty was enough, that freedom could win. The world adored them, but the trophy was not theirs to take home. Four years after their beautiful downfall, Brazil returned. Older, wiser, but still romantic. Tele Santana was retained as manager, a rare show of trust from the Brazilian higher-ups. Zico was 33, Socrates was fading, Falcao's legs were slower, but the dream that Jogo Bonito could still win remained. Up front was Caressa, a complete number 9 in his prime. The midfield, carrying the familiar names of Zico, Socrates and Falcao, ensured that the style would not change. Brazil still played to enchant, not to grind. Brazil would line up in a flexible 4-2-2-2, evolving into a midfield-heavy 4-3-1-2 in possession. There was no traditional winger, instead overloads through the middle and late arrivals from fullbacks like Josimar. 3 wins, 0 goals conceded. The goals weren't glorious, but they were effective. Caressa would lead the line with composure, and Josimar, a last-minute call-up to the team, scored a screamer from right back. Brazil were through, and were very, very hopeful. It was Brazil unleashed in the round of 16. Josimar would score again, Socrates converted with excellence, and Zico, who came on as a substitute, was greeted by applause, still adored by the fans. Next up, however, was their greatest challenge, France. In Guadalajara's heat, the two most elegant teams of the decade collided. Brazil struck first, Caressa from a sweeping move across goal. France responded, Platini, on his birthday nonetheless, finishing after a midfield storm. Then, absolute heartbreak. Zico was brought on in the 74th minute, and as a living legend, he stepped up for a penalty to put Brazil ahead. And missed. Extra time could not separate them. In the shootout, Socrates would miss, Julio Cesar hit the post, France would advance, and Brazil could only weep. 1986 would prove the final flicker of Brazil's romantic era. They went out not with chaos, but with grace. A beautiful goodbye for legends of the game. By 1990, Brazil had stopped dancing. There was no melody, no flair, and only structure. The failure of 82 and 86 had broken Brazil's romanticism, and now they turned to hard pragmatism. The coach, Sebastião Lazzaroni, a strict disciplinarian, was the architect of the system. Lazzaroni introduced Brazil's first ever libero system, a 3-5-2 built around a sweeper behind a rigid midfield block. Dunga, a functional midfielder, was preferred over flair players. Creative geniuses like Romario were benched. Visionaries like Tita and Silas were marginalized. This wasn't Jogo Bonito, it was survival. 3 wins, just 4 goals. The football was dry. Slow build-up, minimal risk. Caressa scored twice, leading an isolated front line. Brazil would top the group, but the soul was missing. They had hoarded possession for 3 games, not to create, but to contain. In the round of 16, it was a match soaked in tension. Brazil dominated early, hitting the post and peppering the Argentine goal. But in the 80th minute, the inevitable occurred. Maradona picked up the ball and sliced through Brazil's midfield like silk through iron. A single pass and a goal. Brazil were out. Their structure had failed, their artistry suppressed. 1990 would prove not a tactical misstep, but an identity crisis. The price of abandoning Jogo Bonito was not just elimination, it was emptiness. In 1994, Brazil arrived in the United States not to entertain, but to win. Head coach Carlos Alberto Pereira had one mission: to bring the trophy home. Beauty was no longer a priority, efficiency was. Brazil played a rigid 4-4-2 built on 2 pillars, a defensive midfield shield led by Dunga, and a strike duo of Romario and Bebeto, combining instinct with chemistry. Romario danced, but only in flashes. Bebeto worked in silence. The midfield was static but disciplined. Brazil coasted through the group. Romario led the charge, not with flair, but with sharp, clinical strikes. Their shape was rigid, their transitions precise, and for the first time in decades, Brazil looked European. On July 4th, America's Independence Day, Brazil stifled the hosts in a grinding physical match. Bebeto scored the only goal in the 72nd minute, while Dunga and Mauro Silva dominated the midfield battle. Against the Dutch, Brazil showed rare openness, a true battle. Romario struck again, Bebeto added a second. After the Dutch pulled level, Branco's Thunderbolt won it. It was the most expressive match of the tournament, but still controlled. In the semi-final against Sweden, it was all about a moment. Romario again off a header. This was his World Cup, and Brazil would move on to the final. The final, played against Italy in Pasadena, California, was a war of attrition. Heat, fatigue, fouls, and fear. No goals, no moments, just tension. In the penalty shootout, Baresi missed and Romario scored. Dunga, the symbol of this Brazil, would convert his penalty. And to seal the deal, Roberto Baggio sent his penalty into the sky. Brazil were champions, their fourth star, but without the sparkle. They had done it, but many would ask at what cost. Jogo Bonito was not to be found in Pasadena that day. Brazil won, but they didn't sing, and the world wondered if the beautiful game had finally grown cold. The final whistle in Pasadena felt, for a moment, like the end of a love story. Brazil, once the cathedral of dribbles and backheels, had just lifted the trophy with grit, shape, and a penalty shootout in the final. Jogo Bonito, the game played with a grin, seemed to have been packed away with Romario's boots and Dunga's clenched fist. Yet somewhere on their triumphant podium stood a 17-year-old reserve named Ronaldo Nazario. He never kicked a ball that summer, but beneath the confetti he watched and listened. The samba muted, the collars dulled, and the music of the streets replaced by a military drum. 4 years later, he would rewrite the melody and remind the planet that Brazilian football is not merely about winning, but about dancing while you win. So if 1994's pragmatic triumph felt like Jogo Bonito's funeral, it just proves that sometimes the beautiful game only sleeps, and Ronaldo Nazario was its alarm clock. Stay tuned for part 2.